Welcome back, everyone, to day 2 of Heritage Education Network Belize's first Culture Symposium. I am April Martinez, and I will be your moderator for today. Yesterday's series of events were quite remarkable as they focused more on the tangible parts of our Belizean culture: archaeology, heritage research, and museum spaces. They all brought the ancient world to life in our modern day setting and showed our audience that there is much more to be discovered on Belize's prehistory and its connection to our Mesoamerican roots. Today, we are going to dive into an era that is probably more familiar with our viewers, for it embodies all things intangible: the way we talk, politics, politics, and the stories our grandparents or great grandparents told us when we were kids. Today, we are hearing about Belize in the colonial setting and its connection to our present day culture, keeping up with languages, culture, heritage, and the arts. Please remember that we are live, yes, on Facebook, but also check us out on our YouTube channel at Heritage Education Network Belize. And if you don't have internet and you have a TV lying around somewhere, you can also tune in to the national channel where they're showing us live on cable as well. Well, without further ado, let these festivities begin. Now, we have today for our keynote address, it is my greatest pleasure to present Miss Ritamae Hyde Tala. Ms. Ritamae Hyde Tala is a writer, poet, and heritage specialist from Belize. She's titular of a Master of Arts in Heritage Studies from the University of West Indies in Mona. With over 19 years of professional experience in the field of culture and development, she presently works at the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization headquarters in Paris. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you Miss Ritamae Hyde.
Greetings and thank you, April. Let me just quickly. Directors, Heritage Education Network, Belize, Miss Sylvia Batty, Miss Rebecca Fridell, Miss April Martinez, and Miss Ella Bekesi. All guest presenters from Belize, the Caribbean, United States of America, and Europe. Their participants connected from Belize and across the globe. It gives me great pleasure and honor as a Belizean to participate in the first ever Kulcha Symposium, bringing together such a diverse lineup of presenters, creating a meaningful space for them to engage in dialogue, and promoting inclusivity and community participation in the sphere of culture and development in Belize. Here, I must be honest and acknowledge that I wish I was physically present in Belize for this momentous occasion at such a pertinent time as we approach the 40th anniversary of independence of our beloved country. Yet, I am grateful for the digital medium and the opportunity it has afforded me and the thousands of viewers that will have direct and indirect access to follow the key presentations and reflections that will surely arise from this symposium. Enormous thanks to Heritage Education Network Belize and their media partner, the National Channel, for the groundbreaking work of organizing this online symposium. I am certain that this will lay the foundation for many such future symposiums to advance our collective engagement and research in the highly relevant field of culture and development. To start, I would like to ask two questions. What is culture? And what role does it play in the building of identities, communities, and as a driver for development in the Belizean context? Culture, as we know, can be defined in a multiplicity of ways, in as much as the forms it encompasses. UNESCO defines culture as the set of distinctive, spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or a social group that encompasses not only art and literature, but lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. In Belize, we see and celebrate this diversity in our cultural and natural heritage, both tangibly and intangibly. It is present in our languages like Quechua, Yucatec, Mopan, Garifuna, Creole, Spanish, and English. In our music and dances like punta, brockdown, and marimba. In the food we eat like hudutu, rice and beans and stewed chicken, tamales, dukunu, and chimole. In the stories we tell our children of Tata Duende, Larona, Ixtabay, and Old Heg. In the splendor of our Maya sites and the natural heritage of our barrier reef, and notably in the ways of our living and being, the way we see the world and express our hopes and dreams. These are surely not an exhaustive list with regards to cultural heritage in Belize, but a snippet of the cultural spring that we drink from as Belizeans. How does culture build our identities? To answer, let's take intangible cultural heritage, which concerns the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills recognized by communities themselves as part of their cultural heritage and transmitted from generation to generation. Intangible cultural heritage is a living heritage that evolves and adapts progressively to changes made by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with nature, and their history. We can therefore see living heritage as the DNA that creates and recreates the identity of communities and groups the world over. In a post-slavery and post-colonial society such as Belize, it is necessary to continue the decolonization of our identities by closely examining our cultural heritage and using those identity markers to further empower who we are as a people. In Bob Marley's Redemption song, we are reminded of the importance to emancipate our minds from mental slavery, as none but ourselves can free our minds. Lila Vernon in Ding Ding Walla Walla echoed the importance of retrieving, connecting to, and celebrating our African heritage. Music is one example of how people for centuries have used the arts to affirm their identities, fight against racism, oppression, inequalities, and other forms of injustices. How many of you know that during slavery in Belize, drumming was punishable by death? Yes, enslaved Africans could be sentenced to death for drumming and exercising their culture. This was not unique to Belize, but was the case in most of the Caribbean, as the institution of slavery was implicit in cultural suppression. The fact that drumming has survived in Belize and the Caribbean is testimony to how cultural heritage can be used to reinforce our identities. Culture constitutes our well-being, giving us the strength and the resilience needed to face uncertain times such as the present with the COVID pandemic. which has plunged the global economy in recession and has impacted all sectors, including health, education, and culture. We have seen during this time how important it is to dig deep into our culture and creativity to forge ahead. Several of our cultural institutions, artists, and cultural workers have found ways to use digital technologies to continue their activities, communicate with the public, and provide access to cultural content. I take particular note that the need to provide a space for the sharing of cultural heritage and research is what gave birth to Heritage Education Network Belize last year, and the successful campaign they launched on Facebook to promote intercultural dialogue and share heritage. Culture is fundamental for sustainable development. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development constitutes a plan of action addressing the three dimensions, economic, social, and environmental, of sustainable development through 17 sustainable development goals as highly interdependent spheres of action that inform development pathways at all levels and respecting the three fundamental principles of human rights, equality, and sustainability. Culture effectively contributes to sustainable development along each of its three dimensions, as well as to the requirement of peace and security as fundamental prerequisites for sustainable development. Inclusive social development cannot be achieved without sustainable food security, quality healthcare, access to safe water and sanitation, quality education for all, inclusive social protection systems, and gender equality. Human societies have constantly developed and adapted their intangible cultural heritage, including knowledge and practices concerning nature, as well as social practices, in order to address fundamental needs and social issues across time and space. In Belize, traditional health practices, foodways, social gatherings, celebrations, and knowledge transmission systems play essential roles for communities to achieve inclusive social development. Environmental sustainability requires ensuring a stable climate, sustainably managing natural resources, and protecting biodiversity. Traditional knowledge, values, and practices accumulated and renewed across generations as part of intangible cultural heritage have guided human societies in their interactions with the surrounding natural environment for millennia. Today, the contribution of intangible cultural heritage to environmental sustainability is recognized in many fields, such as biodiversity conservation, sustainable natural resource management, and natural disaster preparedness and response. Sustainable development depends on stable, equitable, and inclusive economic growth based on sustainable patterns of production and consumption. This requires productive and decent employment, reduction of poverty and inequalities, low carbon, as well as resource-efficient economic growth and welfare protection. The cultural and creative industries constitute an important asset for this transformative change. It constitutes a driving force for economic development, encompassing a diversity of productive activities with both monetary and non-monetary value, and contributes in particular to strengthening local economies such as Belize. The cultural and creative industries constitute an important source of innovation in the face of change and help achieve inclusive economic development at the local and international levels. The importance of arts education, youth employment, economic diversification, and the contribution of sustainable tourism, developing and strengthening the cultural and creative industries, and of course, the overall cultural policies framework needed to advance Belize's cultural development must be underscored. The road ahead continues, and we each have an important role in this crucial building process. In closing, I was once told that there are words and there's the spirit of words. This culture symposium has certainly brought a new spirit of meaningful discourse on culture and development in Belize. I look forward to the illuminating presentations and discussions that will surely come from the presenters and participants gathered here today. And I thank you all once more for the opportunity to join you virtually from France. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Ritamae, and I hope you stick around a little bit for our presentations. So let's move on. Just a quick little recap on what we are having here today. Thank you, Miss Ritamae. Hi, Tala, for everything that you have just said to us. I'm sure that our audience has truly appreciated your efforts in being here today, all of your wonderful points that you have made. And really and truly, there's a lot of information that you have shared that our audience is probably not aware of. So I thank you so much. Miss Ritamae Hyde taught me history at UB, and I am so happy to have her here as one of our keynote speakers. So let's just dive in and move on. A little bit about the next 2 days. So we have 2 more full days of presentations. We stream the conference live on our Facebook and YouTube channels, so anyone can tune in at any time. We have multiple live sessions each day. You can view the various segments for each day by downloading our program from our website at heritagebelize.org/symposium. We have organized the conference to have a morning and afternoon sessions. And don't worry, we have a lunch break in between. We've also scheduled our presentations by themes, and each theme has a coffee break. So you're always able to move away and come back for more talks on culture. Please don't forget to support Heritage Education Network Belize and the Kulcha Symposium by donating on the Heritage Education website. You can visit the links shown during the symposium. This symposium was brought to you by directors of Heritage Education Network Belize and our wonderful volunteers and our media partner, the National Challenge. Now, without further ado, we officially begin the second day of our first Belize KULCHA Symposium. On our second day, we are going to discuss more about Belize's colonial society and the ways these histories shaped our modern realities. The gaps that are missing in our Belizean history stem from the first contact all the way to our Independence Day. Therefore, it is refreshing to have our lineup in this morning and afternoon session filled with research trying to connect those dots and close those gaps. Our first speaker for our second day is Mr. Frantz Smith, who graduated with a bachelor's degree in agriculture from the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. He is a Fulbright scholar and holds a master's degree in aquaculture from Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi. Prior to doing his first degree, he worked and did the first collections for the Department of Museums, which eventually became the Museum of Belize. We will now hear from Mr. Frantz's presentation, Artless Economic Transitions.
My name is Frantz Smith. I am a Belizean writer. I write mainly for young people. But today, my little paper that I've prepared for the Belize Heritage Network is titled Unbalanced Development. Where are the arts? So the observation that we want to address in this little paper is that Belize has developed politically, economically, environmentally, socially, in a number of to a significant degree. For example, the environmental ethic in Belize is notable. Also politically, we are we would say we are very mature politically. Our transition of governments have always been smooth, probably smoother than the United States transition in 2020. But we note that there are few tangible outcomes that have been accomplished in the creative sector, like the arts and culture. So we're going to talk about this, and we're going to show you some of what the, the potential is out there, and we're going to make some suggestions at the end. So to the right, we see the depiction of a political event in Belize when the birth of the independence movement in Belize. This is at the last day of December in 1949 when the founding fathers met. So my research generally focuses on the domestic exports of Belize. What I do, I go through all the old paper documents at the archives, and we have come up with some time series data of how the export sector of Belize has evolved from the 1950s up until a few years ago. So I use a number of sources like these. This example that you're seeing here are from the colonial reports, the annual reports. These are from the 1940s, 50s. They started, and they finished in the 1970s. We also get a lot of data from the annual reports of the various ministries, like the Ministry of Health, the Agriculture Department, then eventually the Ministry of Agriculture. So we have scoured all of these old paper documents at the archives. And what I do, I write notes, the key information. And like, for example, we see in this example of 1960, we know that in 1960, Hurricane Abby passed through South Stank Creek. The citrus acreage was 4,000 acres and the grapefruit was 1,000 acres. We see we have hard data there, no? There was an annual citrus field day in Alta Vista. You had sugarcane information, and the ratios of sugar per acre. You have coconut information, and we have awapala information. We have copra information, banana information. So what I do, I take these information and I enter them into Excel. Example we have here is from 1946 to 1965. So I enter the old data into Excel, and we make graphs and just try to understand them, no? So we see here that between the 1950s and 1960s that forestry is on the decline, and our agriculture is stagnant for the most part of the 1950s, but in 1955 you see an increase to the point that agriculture supersedes forestry earnings in the late 1950s. So we see here that in like it's actually around 1955 that the growth in agriculture really starts, which is primarily due to sugar production in the north. And actually the reason for this was that farmers started to use fertilizers in 1955. So we see that that agriculture increases the earnings, the exports in millions increases for agriculture, whereas it was around 4 million. That's the total exports of the country, for forestry was around 4 million. It started to increase with agriculture. Within like 3 or 4 years, like 6 years, it practically doubles. So this is the kind of research that I do. But is this all? Is this all that was happening in Belize in terms of productivity and the creative process. We know that there was also there's a significant amount of art being produced. And we see it, for example, although the mural at the back is the second iteration from the 1990s, we know that this man, Mr. Miguel Villamor, had created a mural previously to this in the 1970s. It was an interesting and important piece of art for Belize. We have people like Mr. George Gabb, who created the sleeping giant sculpture in the I'm not sure the year that he did it, but in between that period, the period between the end of colonialism and a young independent nation. Then you had people like Mr. Benjamin Nicholas, who was creating artwork. So we see though, we go back to the graphs, so we see though that like in the last graph we showed that agriculture began to supersede forestry in the 1960s, 50s and 60s. But around the 2003-2004, we see that the next wave that came was tourism, that outdid the foreign exchange earnings from than increased or superseded the gains from agriculture. So this is how it looks. And these data are from the Central Bank of Belize annual reports. Obviously, between 2019 and 2020, with the arrival of COVID-19, we see that there was a precipitous drop in tourism. And we would have expected that from the closing of the borders. But we know that besides these major industries, there is growth. There is some growth in culture, but it has been based on extractivism, where there is little supply to the local market. There are a number of private collectors, but a lot of the paintings and art and sculptures and so on are for export, and there is not much art in the Belize that is sold to the masses in Belize, no, where there is a tremendous need for art, because we are an independent nation, and we should be, a lot of our knowledge and our identity should be conveyed in the art, and we should have artists that all Belizeans know of. In Cuba you have the artists, in Guatemala, in Costa Rica you have the artists, but why don't we have our artists that everybody knows? But we know they're out there, right? There is a limited supply, but we know they're out there. So we know that there is need for investment in our artists to get their work out there to where it is needed. So I'll give you some examples of these artists and some of the important work that they are doing. So this piece was done by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Herman Figueroa. He is from the Hillview area of Santa Elena, and he did this painting of the birth of the independence movement in Belize. Previous to this, I don't think that this has ever been depicted. There is no picture of this meeting. There are notes. There are historical documentation that it happened, and we know more or less who was there and so on. But nobody has actually visualized this, especially for the children and the high schoolers, and maybe even some of the mature people would want to see this kind of thing. Then there is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Orlando Na from Kamalote, who created this piece depicting the vision and the worldview of the nationalists that came out of the meeting that we just saw. That there was interest and care for the people of Belize, especially the young and the women in rural areas, and their ability to supply their basic needs for their families. It was an important topic in the 1970s. Then there is this young lady by the name of Ana Osuegueda. She works out of Plasencia, who is able to assist in the teaching of math from by introducing the young people of Belize to people like Dr. Arlie Petters. So we see that art can be used to teach math. Because as far as I understand it, math at this level that Dr. Petters does is less about numbers and about more theories. But we need to get our people to take the first steps into getting to this point. We need to get the young people to start visioning themselves in this type of role if we are to become a developed country. We see that art. This is from Miss Osuegueda again. Art in the conservation movement. It's very important that we depict sceneries to young children, especially the younger ones, and get them to appreciate art as well as nature. And again, this is Miss Osuegueda from Plasencia. This is a depiction of the caste war of Yucatan. It's basically an illustration to show the key concepts, the execution of the gentleman in Yucatan and the resulting war and the immigration from Mexico into Belize and the birth of the sugarcane industry in the north. Then we have people like Mr. Helman Chi in Sokots, who has been able to depict the early players in the tourism industry that so many of us benefit from. But a lot of people, they would never see this, they would never hear about it. But if you see it, you can more imagine it, and it can help you to build the story of how this $1 billion industry started in Belize. Then we have, for example, again, Mr. Herman Figueroa. This is a piece that he created for me to depict the importance of conservation of our forests. And this is very important, not only for culture, but for the environment and for the economy and the social stability of Belize in a time of climate change, when floodings are happening all over the world. We need to conserve our forests in a way that we can supply our basic needs, but we also need to protect our watersheds. This is a key important thing that we need to conserve, and we need to have in modern parts of our economy, like the aviation industry, the transport sector, the mass transit of Belize needs to be improved. The marine transport, as we see over there on the sea. So we see that art has a very important role to play in the development of Belize. It's not only about domestic exports that art can play an important part. So we have to make a little bit of some conclusions and recommendations. We kind of note that there are a few big companies that support artists in Belize. Like in other parts of the world, the banks, all the major banks have major collections that they invest in. As far as I know, it's only Atlantic Bank that has maintained that tradition. And you don't hear about none of the tourism companies, the utility companies. We don't hear about any major art collection, and this is, to me, a very, very it's a detriment, right? That other countries, where they have big turnovers of money, they stimulate the creative sector, and as a result of that, there's a lot of art that is coming from Melchor that is sold house to house in Belize, and I imagine a lot of even offices, maybe some government offices, are supporting the arts in Melchor, whilst our artists in Belize they have very limited market. Um, the commerce in paintings and sculptures is not on anybody's radar. There's nobody who has this sector as a focus to develop, and we know that this has a lot of potential for Belize to develop our people, not only the artists but the people who can benefit from this art. In many cases, the artists aren't asking for much. All they need is good quality, cheap canvas, and these canvas can be upgraded in Belize. You can put on the yeso and you can use them. And in return for these canvases, our people can bring. Eventually, they can be bringing to you masterpieces, and we know that they can do it. But to get there, we need some help where canvases can be imported and the frames can be made from Belizean wood, and these can be stretched, and a whole entire industry can be created. Instead of importing so many canvases, you go to the art shops and to some of the importing companies that import stationery and so on. They bring in a tremendous amount of stretched canvas, but a lot of these can be produced in Belize if some canvas can be brought in for the artists, and we see that they can create a lot of good things for the benefit of a lot of people, and we also note that there are exports, but we need to start recording these exports to show what this art is valued outside of Belize, and maybe that can help to stimulate the local scene, because it seems that in a number of the domestic exports, the product is of high quality, but it's generally hard to sell in Belize until some other country out there finds your pepper sauce and your well, the main example is the pepper sauce. Some other country out there finds it, like Japan. Then the Belizeans realize that they have something really valuable here, something really good, that everybody should have one, and then they start supporting the local industry. So we just put that as our little paper, and we would like to hear your ideas and your responses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Frantz, for that insightful presentation. Next, we have Mr. Alexander Evans. Alexander Evans is a Belizean composer and arranger, a music educator, and multi-instrumentalist. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Musical Arts, his specialization from the University of West Indies in St. Augustine, where he earned first class honors, the Newman Alexander Award for the top music student, and the Beryl McBurney Award for most outstanding overall student. Alexander's music has won 7 national competitions across 3 different countries, including Belize's National Song Competition, Guyana's National Panorama, and Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister's Best Village Trophy Competition. Evans was also the founding director of the Pandemonium Steel Band in Belize City. Please welcome Mr. Alexander Evans' presentation on the history of steel pan in Belize and how it connects us to our Afro-Caribbean identity.
Good day and thank you for joining us. I am Alexander Evans and I'll be talking about the history of steel pan in Belize and how it connects us to our Afro-Caribbean identity. Belize has been blessed with a multitude of ethnic, historical, and regional identities. In this presentation, I will draw focus on our Caribbean identity by telling the story of the steel pan, the only new acoustic instrument to have been invented in the last century. How was it invented? By whom? How did it get to Belize? Let's start in 19th century Trinidad. The 1800s in Trinidad, particularly post-emancipation, saw a significant push and pull between the former enslaved people and the white colonial ruling class over the right to congregate, celebrate, and even worship. The century following emancipation saw the ruling class banning revelry, limiting the size of bands, and even outlawing the use of drums in the Canboulay festival. The response, of course, was unrest and rioting, with the famous Canboulay riot taking place in Port of Spain in 1881. This eventually led to drums being banned altogether in 1931. Now, why is this significant? Because drums are a part of who we are. I say we because this statement is true for everyone that is a part of the African diaspora, or as a friend of mine likes to call it, live as richer. Live as richer as opposed to die as poorer. I love it. For our ancestors, drums were a vital part of their social, cultural, and spiritual identity. Drums were used in celebration and in mourning, for communication and for worship. Drums are our birthright. And in 1931, Trinidad, our brothers and sisters had this birthright taken away from them. Now, I'm sticking on this point because this particular example explicitly demonstrates the type of systemic erasure of identity that is characteristic of post-colonial societies. It's a lot easier to control a people when you make them forget who they are. But our brothers and sisters didn't forget. They adapted. This limitation became an opportunity for innovation. Now, by this time, Canboulay and Carnival had been reinstated, though being tightly controlled by the colonial gatekeepers. During this festival, in lieu of drums, the masqueraders cut varying lengths of bamboo and used them as percussion, with the longer, heavier pieces being slammed vertically on the ground to be used as bass, with the smaller pieces being held and struck and used as leads, or what they would call cutters. This was called tambu bamboo, and tambu bamboo bands started to form and became more prevalent in festivities. Then, of course, in 1935, tambu bamboo was also banned. So in 1936, with the need to express themselves percussively as is their birthright, the oppressed people took to the streets beating metal dustbins and biscuit pans. Eventually, they realized that when these pans were beaten to the point of developing indentations, there would kind of be a vague pitch when these indentations are struck. Now, there's no definitive singular individual credited officially with the invention of the steel pan, but the most popular story credits Winston Spree Simone as the first person to put distinct notes in a pan and play a melody. Eventually, this led to larger oil drums being used, more notes being added, and extensive experimentation in developing different types of steel pans with various ranges, timbres, and musical functions. In the 1940s and 50s, the instrument started to spread to other Caribbean countries, including Antigua and Barbuda and Guyana. Then, in 1954, a Trinidadian student named Arden Williams took a pan with him when he went to attend the University of the West Indies, Mona, in Jamaica. This would lead to the formation of the first steel band in Jamaica. Now, this event would prove to be integral to the story of Pan making its way to Belize. During the years following the arrival of steel pan in Jamaica and the formation of their first steel band in 1954, two Belizeans of particular note would attend UEMONA and join the University Steel Band. These were Dr. Lennox Pike and Dr. Colville Young. The latter, we know, would go on to become Belize's Governor General, and is undoubtedly one of the single most influential individuals to the development of music in Belize over the past several decades. In 1965, Drs. Pike and Young would return to Belize and form the All Stars Steel Band, Belize's first steel band, which was initially comprised of 6 members. So just to put it into perspective, this musical instrument hasn't even been in existence for a full century, not even 90 years, and it's been in Belize for almost 60 years. That's 2/3. So for 2/3 of the amount of time that this instrument has been in existence, we've had it in Belize. I think that's pretty awesome. Now, the formation of All Star Steel Band would lay the foundation for all subsequent steel bands being formed in Belize. Dr. Young would later go on to become the president of the then University College of Belize, UCB, where he formed another steel band. Then he was appointed as the Governor General of Belize and passed on the musical directorship to his son Lynn. Now, Lynn had been exposed to steel pan from an early age because of being around with All Stars rehearsing, and he himself had attended UA St. Augustine in Trinidad, where he played with several bands. Eventually, a number of players who had graduated from UCB and were former members of the University Steel Band, they wanted to continue playing, naturally. So they formed the Pantempters Steel Orchestra in 1992. At the same time, the University College of Belize was undergoing significant changes, which led to the University Steel Band becoming dormant. At Lynn's recommendation, the unused instruments were donated to Grace Chapel Primary School. In 1993, the Grace Primary Steel Band was formed under the directorship of Miss Gloria Edwards. A year later, she passed it on to Mr. Paul Chris Bradshaw. This steel band would eventually become known as the Fantastic Steel Band. Several years later, Mr. Carlos Perote would take on the directorship and remains there to this day, where the instruments are being used by both Grace Primary and Holy Redeemer Primary Schools. Mr. Bradshaw went on to direct the Wesley College Steel Band established around 2004. Another steel band formed as a result of Pantempters, as a direct result of Pantempters, is the Panerific Steel Band. In 1997, upon returning to Belize, Julietta Burroughs Lewis joined the Pantempters Steel Orchestra at Lynn Young's request. A few years later, she moved to Belmopan to take up a position at Our Lady of Guadalupe. In 2005, the school received a donation of steel pan instruments via the Governor General, Sir Colville Young, which marked the birth of Panerific Steel Band. What I hope to illustrate is that the formation of All Stars Steel Band in Belize in 1965 started a chain reaction which led to the formation of every subsequent steel band to date. All Stars led to Pantempters, Pantempters led to Pantastics, to Panerifics, to Holy Redeemer, to Wesley, and more. I, myself, started my steel pan journey in 2007 when I joined, you guessed it, Pantempters Steel Orchestra. Then in 2014, I became the founding director of the Pandemonium Steel Band. It's all connected, and I find it fascinating to examine these threads of interconnectivity. The steel pan is the youngest acoustic musical instrument in the world and is the ultimate symbol of resistance, ingenuity, and the importance of fighting for the right to express. Since its invention, the steel pan has spread throughout the region and its sound has become almost synonymous with the Caribbean. The steel pan is beloved around the world and it may never had existed had it not been for our brothers and sisters across the Caribbean Sea insisting on their right to express themselves culturally in the face of colonial oppression and attempted erasure. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the systems and mentalities built by these post-colonial ideals still exist today. As a result, we oftentimes fail to see the value and the importance of culture. Culture is most often a distant afterthought in the conversation of national priority. And it is imperative that we as a people dismantle that narrative. We must fight tooth and nail for the right to remember, embrace, love, and express who we are, just as our brothers and sisters throughout the Live as Richer, throughout the diaspora have been doing for centuries. We have the same power flowing through our veins. I'll leave you with this. I believe that the most valuable thing we have is who we are. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Mr. Evans, for that wonderful presentation. I think that you have jump-started our morning with that wonderful segment with some very wonderful music. Keep saying wonderful. Well, again, thank you both, Mr. Frantz Smith and Mr. Alexander Evans, for your lovely presentations this morning. We are now moving into our most engaging segment of our symposium, our live Q&A with our presenters. So it is my pleasure to please bring forth onto the screen Mr. Frantz Smith and Mr. Alexander Evans. Please, guys, this is the time where you can engage with our presenters. And I see that we already have a few questions lined up for today. So I guess this question here is directed to Mr. Frantz Smith. Christopher Broster says, nice pointers, but my question then is, what is the cause for young talent or artists in Belize to not being promoted? And based on research, what is the percentage and extent of young artists in the development of Belize? I guess this question can be for both of you, right? But Mr. Frantz?
Okay, let me try to understand the question. What is the cause of young artists not being promoted? I guess when you look back, one of the first painters was Mr. Belize. I think they used to call him Bok Belize. But from then, he didn't get much support. I guess the budget, I don't know if there's a line item anywhere in anybody's budget that is specifically for purchasing of art. There might be what they call incidental budgets that you can use for offices, but I don't know if anywhere in Belize there is a budget that is specifically to purchase pieces. So that's one of my the first answer to the question from my end. And what is the percent and extent of young artists in the development of Belize? We have I think we might be entering into a little mini renaissance, because there are a lot of young people, and there is one impressive guy down there in Mango Creek who is making a business of this. I think you all know him, no? Morales, and then there is Herman. There are a lot of young people, but and there is a young lady in Belize City, Miss Arzu. Um, what I would want to see them doing is to really get into the whole digital thing, to get into the I think they call it NFTs, to start to produce um, electric art. That's my little take on the question. Thanks, Christopher, Robert, Roster.
Alex, do you have anything to add?
I would just add that the lack of promotion, and not even necessarily just the lack of promotion for young artists, but the lack of opportunities for development. So there's the issue of having opportunities to be developed, and then also opportunities to be showcased as well. And this is across, not, I know that Mr. Smith was talking specifically about visual arts, but this is true across visual arts, dance, drama, music. I think what it really comes down to is the culture that we have towards culture, the culture that we have towards the arts as well, where as a people, we don't really put enough importance on it. So because we don't put enough importance on it as a collective, I think that is very much reflected in policy. It's very much reflected in the types of opportunities that come up and that sort of thing. But I do share Mr. Smith's sentiment in that there is almost kind of like a mini renaissance that that I wouldn't say it's happening, but it's kind of like threatening to start happening, because also within the aforementioned fields, I know a lot of young people who are saying, you know what, I don't want to be artist on the side. I want to and work as a bank teller or something and make a living and just do my art on the side. There are a lot more young people who want to take that chance and pursue art as a career, pursue music as a career, pursue dance as a career, and actually find opportunities to go away and further their knowledge, further their expertise, and that sort of thing. And that for me is incredibly encouraging.
Very true, and the same goes for that initiative in terms of doing the research for that kind of work, right? Because the other half of the question is based on research, what is the percentage and extent of young artists in the development of Belize? So that, I think somebody else needs to do some further work on that. I guess our other question somebody has here is, as an aspiring artist, I would like to know how could I get my art out on the household names? And that question comes from Mr. Ian Vidal. I suppose that question would go to Mr. Smith as well.
There are a number of things that you can do, right? You have to probably borrow, in my opinion, you could probably borrow some of the strategies that are being used in the digital art. You need to probably do you need to be, every day you have to be doing something. Don't worry, even if it's making a lot of money, but just getting out there, get seen. You have to give out a certain amount of free content. So you put it out there. Don't be you have to share, basically. If you don't share your art, people won't see it, and it won't start to hit. by sharing what you're doing, you're building up your skills, right? You're every week you're producing something, you learn something, so you're building your skills, you're letting people see you. Then I think that, well, that's a good start, no? You need to probably find somebody who could sell it for you too. Try to find a way to sell it. There is an art box in Belmopan. There you need to try to
Art
find,
Shack in Belmopan.
yeah, art shack in
Mhm.
Belmopan, and there are a lot of places in Placencia. But the problem is there's a lot of competition. I think from Guatemala, a lot of it is coming in, and it's cheaper, no. Another thing I think you could do is you need to try to leverage China, right? You could produce it. You could produce the original piece of art, but you can get prints cheap in China, and you can try to work with somebody who is publishing it, and maybe make prints and sell to like the hotels. If you can produce really good stuff, the big hotels, there you go into any hotel, you find a lot of art, right? You find a lot of prints, and those prints are relatively cheap. You could find a way to produce prints where you aren't creating stuff every day new. So that's my comment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have a question here directed for Mr. Evans. Um, Randine Williams wants to know how many different types of steel pans are now currently used in Belize.
Um, so based on the ones that I've seen from all the bands and stuff that I've worked with, you have your tenor pans, your low C and high C tenor pans. You have your double tenors, double seconds, um, double guitar, triple cello, four cello, tenor bass, six bass. Um, that pretty much covers the different types that I've seen recently in Belize. And one of the things that I think is interesting with the naming of the different types of pans is that, especially in the case of the double guitar and the triple cello and the four cello, is that the names kind of like emulate what the musical function would be in like an orchestral setting or like a contemporary setting or that kind of. But yeah, those are the types that, to my knowledge, are being used mostly in Belize.
Oh, that's wonderful. I don't know anything about music, so I'm learning as I go here with everyone that is viewing as well. It seems that we have a question here from one of our viewers on YouTube. Uh, Ingvar Seelhoff, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Or do you have especially young artists to conquer places, sites, rooms in public to be seen as important part of the society and raise their artistic voice? Question.
Is that the full question, or do you?
Yes, I believe that he is asking if we have created spaces and besides galleries and besides, I guess, places where they can buy, people can buy their art, if we have created spaces in which the public can see and view the art from the young artists coming up.
Um, I think I can't speak for the entire country, but I think we might be lacking. Although there is some movement to create murals, and there are some collectives like, but they aren't. I don't find that they're pushing themselves up too much. That they aren't so visible.
And I guess this other question here comes hand in hand with that. Ms. Janelle Young, are there any efforts, summer camps, for example, to introduce young children to steel pan and teach them the history of the instrument in order to preserve the tradition of steel bands in Belize for the generations to come?
So this is a difficult question to answer right now in the context of COVID times. But in the before times, in the pre-COVID times, I know that there was a lot of effort from people like Mr. Carlos Perote, from Miss Hiruko Franklin, from Loretta Burroughs Lewis, and from myself in having, and all from Mr. Albert Humes as well with All Stars. So there was definitely a push with the established bands, with the school band, with everything, to try and get more young people involved with the steel pan, to get more young people, to give more young people the opportunity to learn. And I think that particularly between, I'd say over the last decade, that seemed to have become a greater priority with most of the bands. For the sake of, like I mentioned, for the sake of preserving the tradition, for the sake of continuity, and also for the sake of helping to make the instrument and making the experience relevant to more young people. Because one of the best ways to make things relevant to young people is for them to see their peers doing it. Unfortunately, we just like everybody else now, musicians, music educators, and so on, we're forced to navigate this very limiting set of circumstances.
Sounds like you have to create a summer band, Alex. We have another question for you from Miss Kiana Chun.
Mm-hmm.
She's asking, would you say that steel pan has
Mm-hmm.
the true meaning of resistance here in Belize?
Okay. I love this question, because this was part of the philosophy behind getting Pandemonium Steel Band started, because at the time the then president of NICH, Ms. Dan Haylock, along with the then country rep for UNICEF, a Trinidadian woman named Miss Christine Norton, they kind of made the observation and had the realization that steel pan in Belize was a little bit disjunct from what it means kind of in other countries, especially Trinidad. Part of that, based on the history that I spoke about, is the fact that most of the steel bands in Belize with the first couple decades were formed at tertiary level institutions or coming out of tertiary level institutions. So there were a lot of young professionals, there were a lot of middle-aged professionals, there were people in Belize who kind of had the first access to the instrument in that sense. So over the years, some would say that the instrument kind of almost developed almost a elitist identity to it. And what Ms. Haylock and Ms. Norton said is that is very much disingenuous to the instrument and disingenuous to the history of the instrument. So one of the key things that we tried to do with Pandemonium was to not only make it youth-centered, but to give preference to young people who might not have otherwise had access to education. Because to a large degree, music education and music in general in Belize is still kind of seen as something more for affluent members of society. Where if you have the means, then those would tend to be the people who would, send their children to piano lessons or violin lessons. And steel pan, was kind of starting to follow on that same trend to a certain degree. So I don't think that it's necessarily held completely true to its meaning of resistance here in Belize, but at the same time, there have been efforts to try and, get back to the heart of what the instrument is about, and really it's something, music is for everyone. Music should be for everyone. Music should be accessible to everyone. Music education should be accessible to everyone. Arts education in general should be accessible to everyone because it is so critical to our development as humans, and it is so critical to our understanding of culture.
Thank you so much, Alex. And you're absolutely right. The questions keep coming for you, so I will post one here. And guys, please keep them coming. This is such an engaging conversation. JCA Belize is asking if you all do collaborations with other Belizean musicians. It would be nice to see a collaboration of cultural music, marimba, Garifuna drums, and so forth with steel pans.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. That I think one of the things that this question speaks to is just how much richness and diversity we have in Belize, and how much potential we have. If you think about the combination of marimba, and then you add even more Maya elements like the flute and the ocarina and the gourds, which of course the shaka and stuff used by Creole, Garifuna, and Maya. You add Garifuna drums, you add Creole drums, you add the accordion. It's the type of musical tapestry that we have the potential to create is really, really, really such a missed opportunity right now in this country. But one of the things on this year is starting a nonprofit called the Belize Afro-Indigenous Institute for the Visual and Performing Arts, or BIVAPA. And we kind of had our inaugural event for Emancipation Day, and one of the things that we did then was one of the segments was just steel pan soloist, myself, with being accompanied by the Creole drum, Sambai drum, the dundun, the kinkani, and playing and the djembe, and playing only Belizean music, Belizean Garifuna music, Paranda music, Brokdom music, Kunjai music. And that is kind of the heart of more of what I hope to do in the future.
Awesome. This next question comes from Marco Vasquez. This is directed to Mr. Frantz Smith. In terms of visual art, do Belizeans have a platform to upload their work that includes copyright within Belize? We only have the option to pay a fee for each artwork, which can add up. So how do you want to tackle that there, Mr. Smith?
Well, I'm not sure for graphic art, but I know there is Belaipo. If the person has engaged Belaipo as yet, that might be worth looking into. I know they have for copyright. I have a feeling that if they contact Belaipo, they would find a lot of important information that might be able to answer that question.
Okay, I have another question for you here, Mr. Smith, from Ronaldo Kus. What are some of the ways to promote artistic works to increase the exposure of artists and also increase the value of their artistic work?
Like we said, share. I would say that one of the most important thing to do is to try to form partners, right? You're an artist, try to form a partnership or a friendship or a collaboration with somebody who is selling art. Personally, one of the things that I think you could do is, like I said, try to create prints, because there's a lot of hotels, and try to it's a thing about marketing. You need to learn a little bit about marketing. And maybe one of the other things I would say also, don't go by yourself. Try to gang up with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 artists who have the same goals, and you all try to approach the hotels and the wider market, maybe even the international market. But if you do it by yourself, be hard. You need to gather with half a dozen of people like-minded like yourself, where you can fertilize yourselves and help each other.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Frantz. We have room for a couple more questions I see here. This one is also directed to Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans, you have to do a performance for the Belizean people, you know. These questions keep coming for you. What are some of the changes? This question is by Angela Leslie. What are some of the changes we have seen in the reasons for the organization of the steel pan? Do you think that those reasons are productive to society? For example, social gatherings and the fun and togetherness once originated with it is now a stamping ground for criminals. Does the steel community ever comment on the events that happen at these celebrations? That's a very heavy question there, Mr. Evans.
All right. Yeah, Karma. Let me just reread the question one more time. So I'm not sure that I 100% understand the question, but I'll do my best with it. So one of the interesting things, and I'll use history in the way that I speak about it. One of the interesting things that that I did touch on in my presentation was what happened with the development of steel pan in Trinidad after the point, because we were speaking about it in the context of what's most relevant to Belize, and after it was invented and after it went to Jamaica, then we kind of just shift the story to that part of it, but there was still a lot of development happening within Trinidad. Now, because the instrument was invented and developed by a lot of people who kind of like faced the most serious oppression, and as we know, unfortunately, those are also tend to be the communities where crime is a response to that oppression in many cases out of necessity. So the early days of the steel pan movement was riddled with violence, riddled with bloodshed between opposing bands. Like the steel band clashes and stuff was akin to gangs. And that had a big part to play in the instrument not being fully accepted by society because of all of the negative things that were happening, between the bands and that kind of thing. There were a few historical events that gradually led to the acceptance of the instrument, and then eventually the instrument becoming still Trinidad and Tobago's national instrument in the 90s. But I think what is important to take from that story and from that history is that you have to find ways to take the good and leave the bad. You have to find ways to reconnect with the beauty of the instrument and what it does offer, like you mentioned, in terms of socializing, in terms of gathering, in terms of enjoyment, in terms of appreciation and that spirit of community, and find ways to try and alleviate some of the negative aspects that you've alluded to that take place outside the context of steel pan, that take place outside the context of September celebrations, that take place outside the context of carnival and all of that stuff. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and we are going to continue with one more question for you, and then one more question for Mr. Smith that I see here in the comment section. Um, Walter Pineda Jr. wants to know, why is steel pan not taught in secondary schools?
Okay. Um, you know that I'm very passionate about music education, so I have thoughts on this one. But the short answer is money. Actually, the short answer is resources because it's both material resources and human resources. Um, let's start with what currently is taught in most secondary schools because the primary instrument that's being taught from music classes in most secondary schools is the recorder. And having had to teach the recorder in secondary school before and seeing how my students react to it and just speaking to so many people who as adults are saying, I really want to get into music, but then the teacher recorded that such and such a school and that just turned me off from music. And it's really sad, and I think it has a lot to do with a recorder is not a very glamorous instrument. It's not a very rich sounding instrument in most cases. But what it is it's affordable and it's accessible. It's maybe I don't know how much it is now, but it's probably like not even $20 for a recorder. Whereas something like a steel pan, like just one single tenor pan would cost you at least 600 US plus shipping, handling, the cost for a case, the cost for a stand, the cost for mallets. So to get an entire band is really not very cost effective, which is unfortunate because when it comes to how easily it can be picked up, I think that's probably one of the best instruments to use in a school setting because people you automatically fall in love with it when you hear it, when you play it, you're fascinated by it, you want to play it, you want to learn more. um and because it's everything is just percussion, is just laid out in front of you. If I tell you hit this note, then hit that note, then hit that note, then hit that note, you have to play one song already. So it's from that perspective, it's very, very, very easy to learn on a basic level, but very, very, very difficult to master. So it gives you also that path of progression that you're encouraged to want to stay with it. Um, and I think also because of everything that we've talked about, the aforementioned cultural value and historical significance of the instrument as well, I think that it's something that could really, really significantly change the landscape of music education in Belize. Um, One of the things though that I would like to see happen and that I am working on this again, but the biggest challenge is finances, is to get, because there are no steel pan manufacturers here in Belize. So to get a team of steel pan manufacturers, to come probably from Trinidad and kind of like do a residency here in Belize, maybe get some sponsorship from, BNE or one of the other oil companies, or even BSI, because I recently found out that they use the same grade of oil drums, and just get this get the team to actually build the drums here in Belize, and also use that as a learning opportunity to teach other Belizeans how to manufacture the instrument, because then that would lead to the sustainability required to integrate steel pan in secondary school system.
I really applaud that, and I really hope that you can get that going so that we can have steel pan in secondary school, because I was that student that had to play the recorder and never developed any musical talents after that. I would just like to point out for our audience that has been having all of these questions for Mr. Frantz Smith. I noticed in our comment chat box here for Facebook, I believe, that Emergent Corp is following up on a lot of your questions as well, and helping out Mr. Frantz as he answers some of your questions. And then we have one more final question for you, Mr. Frantz Smith, before we head out. This is also by Mr. Marco Vasquez. Why is contemporary art not taught in secondary schools?
Can I give the what you call it, the rough answer?
Please.
Because we don't value our own, right? If we really had put up our people out there, we would teach them about Mr. Bilal, Mr. Pen Cayetano. We would be really teaching about our contemporaries, no? But we people, I don't want to get negative, so. But if we would start valuing our people more, we would put them up there.
So I guess it sounds like we have to put people up there, right?
Yeah.
Well, guys, that ends our lovely and engaging Q&A with Mr. Frantz Smith and Mr. Alexander Evans. Thank you both so much for being here and opening our second day with these amazing presentations. Thank you both, and I hope that you will stick around for the rest of our segments this afternoon and this morning. All right, everyone, we will be taking a short coffee break, and we will be back at 10:15 with our second thematic session for this morning, Decolonizing Belizean Identity. Stick around, you do not want to miss that.
Nupubatiquetel, Tilebalobo, Tubetco Heritage Education Network, Tileyashking, Tileoshking, Lewinal Wo. Join us for the Culture Symposium from the 1st to the 3rd day of September. Heritage Education Network. Konesh Tulakalesh.
Culture Symposium from the 1st to the 3rd of September. Heritage Education Network, Belize. I want it there. Make sure you did
Welcome back to our second session for this morning. We hope you enjoyed our first session on Belize in the historical context and have taken some time to refresh yourselves before our next session. In keeping with the theme of colonial history, we now have our social context session discussing how we are decolonizing Belizean identity. Our first presenter for this session is Mr. Gerardo Polanco. Mr. Gerardo Polanco is a lecturer at Sacred Heart Junior College. He obtained his bachelor's degree at the University of Belize, where he majored in English. He went on to do his graduate degree in Caribbean Studies at the University of the West Indies in Cave Hill campus. His work has been published in the POUI, Cave Hill Journal of Creative Writing, Kyleigh, a Journal of African Diaspora Arts and Letters, and Revista Canadiense, de Estudios Hispánicos. His areas of interest are eco-criticism, coloniality of power, as well as portrayals of indigenous knowledge systems and alternative spiritualities in literature. We are excited to share with you Mr. Gerardo Polanco's presentation on decolonizing Yucatec Maya folklore and spirituality.
Everybody, today I'll be presenting on decolonizing Yucatec Maya folklore and spirituality. Before we get into the presentation, it should be noted that while these folklores exist in other narratives and across ethnic groups in Belize, for instance, in the introduction of characters and caricatures in Belizean folklore, Dr. Palacios says that the old hag comes from Africa, but in Belize she is reported as leaving her skin on the ceiba tree, which is of sacred importance to the Maya. So we have these cross-cultural exchanges between various ethnic groups in Belize. So each ethnic group would change the narrative of these folklores to suit their own traditions and so on. So we need to keep that in mind. However, for this presentation, I will be basing it on the perspective and the retellings of the Yucatec Maya people, the Maya mestizos, or the Masawal, are there sometimes as they're sometimes called. And I will be using these names to refer to these to the Maya people interchangeably throughout the presentation. Now, the idea of the research is based on syncretism. We know that colonialism altered native knowledge systems and modes of worship. The prime one that comes to mind is Hanal Pishan, or as it is more famously known in Belize as Finados. This tradition merges Catholic and Maya religious traditions. It is almost hard to say where Catholic influences begin and where the Maya influences end. But what is certain is that they both have influences of both the Christianity and Maya native religious traditions. So then this begs the question, what other aspects of the Maya mestizo culture has been altered or influenced by colonialism? We know, for instance, the food also has influences of both the clothing, the dances. However, today we'll be looking at how colonialism still influences our understanding of folklore characters such as the duende, the wai, which is the bruja or the bruja, the llorona, and the xtabay. And we will also be discussing how these interpretations inform our collective views on feminism, sexuality, and environmental issues. Again, as Dr. Palacios states in the book Characters and Caricatures, he says folklore characters are instruments that drive home the messages of right and wrong that are integral to most folk tales. It is common knowledge that in Belize, folklore stories are used as a method of correcting behavior in children. So they're scared into good behavior. They're conditioned to behave well because they're being scared by the stories that they're being told. However, Guyanese writer Pauline Melville disagrees with this. She says that it is a great mistake to infantilize folklore as if it were only suitable for children and should be confined to them. She also goes on to say that if we explore other lessons that folklore has to teach us, that then they can even become adult business. In order for us to peel back layers of colonial contamination of these folklore characters, we must first understand how they exist in communities that still believe in them. First of all, we have the duende. What we know of the duende is true across the cultures in Belize. We know what he looks like. We know that he has a big hat, that he doesn't have any thumbs, that his feet are pointed backward, that he is a nuisance, and that he goes on to even rapture children in some cases. So he's generally considered an evil spirit. However, Yucatec Maya grandmothers tell stories of the Nukushtat. The Nukushtat and the duende are basically the same entity. However, their narratives are quite distinct. For the Maya mestizo, the Nukushtat is the guardian spirit of the forest. For instance, my grandmother would tell stories of my father, who used to be a hunter, and whenever he came back from hunting, he would perform rituals of thanksgiving to El Dueño del Monte, and this is another name that is used to refer to the duende or the Nukushtat. The duende, El Dueño del Monte, is a guardian spirit of the forest and all the animals that exist therein. A hunter must not take more than his fill, otherwise the duende would appear and exact revenge. And there's various stories across the Yucatec Maya folklore that tells of entities where they appear to hunters and scare them off or do some kind of harm to them because they have abused the forest or the animals, or they have generally been disrespectful to Mother Nature. Today, modern Mayas still have the duende as a guardian spirit. Some modern Mayas still make offerings to him when they're breaking land for a new milpa, when they're planting crops, or when it's time to harvest. So while we still have the narratives of the duende being evil, in some pockets of the society, of the Yucatec Maya society, the duende is still seen as a sort of guardian spirit. Similarly to the duende, we have another folklore figure whose narrative is different from what it used to be and what it is now, and that is the brujo or the bruja, at least in terms of pre-Columbian times and modern times. The brujo in Maya is known as the Y. The Y is said to be a shapeshifter that transforms into any animal. In some retellings, they shed their skin or remove their head in order to accomplish this transformation. Now, depending on which animal it becomes, the name changes. For instance, we have the Y Pek, which is a brujo that transforms into a dog. We have the Y Keken, which is a brujo that becomes a pig. We have the Y Mis, which is a brujo that becomes a cat. And the brujo is generally up to no good also. They break into homes, they wander the streets in order to frighten passers-by. For instance, again, my grandmother would tell stories of her mother's neighbor who used to be jealous of her mother, and so she would turn into a Y Miss and break into the house just to play around with the food and to generally do a lot of mischief because of the jealousy she had to my great-grandmother. However, in pre-Columbian times across Mesoamerica, shapeshifters were considered healers. In Aztec mythology, for instance, a Nagual had the power to transform themselves into various animals, much like the Maya Y. The animals they would transform into were said to be their companions, and this idea is very similar to the North American native understanding of their spirit animals. So there are staggering similarities between the pre-Columbian Aztec Nagual and the modern Maya. The major exception is that the Y are now considered evil and devil-like. Now, there's a reason that these folkloric characters change from being healers and guardian spirits to evildoers and demonic spirits. In order for us to understand why these folkloric personalities have gone through this change, we must understand what is colonialism's driving force. The main purpose of colonialism was to obtain land and free labor. In order for the land to be conquered, and colonial powers needed to do away with indigenous sovereignty and ownership of the land. To accomplish this, the native population needed to be dehumanized and subjugated. Religion, language, and knowledge systems needed to be destroyed in order for Eurocentric ideals to be supplanted. Ancient and modern Maya religion is closely tied to the land. After all, the Nukushet is a guardian spirit that guards the land, and the Nagual becomes an animal in order to learn medicine from nature itself. The colonial machine entered and wounded the region through its land. In order that the native populations relinquish their claim to the land, native religious beliefs about the land had to be stripped away and replaced by Christian ideals. Belgrade, Smith, and Michel claim that so-called indigenous and third world religions, in part because of their large pantheon of spirits and differing modes of worship, have long been dehumanized and devalued. Because of this, both the Duende and the Wai have gone from being forest guardians and healers, respectively, to tricksters and demons. Now, the implications of this is that sacred Maya tradition has gone through a bastardization because of colonial Christianity and colonial religion, and the implications are even more insidious when we come to when we talk about the seductresses or the female characters in the folklore and their treatment, the perception of women, feminism, and even female sexuality. Again, there are various seductresses recorded in Belizean folklore. However, the two most well known are the Shtabai and the Yorona. Now, the analyses of these characters are applicable to all seductresses in Belizean folklore. For instance, the Shtabai is a demon that seduces and kills men who traditionally have had too much to drink and wander the streets late at night. The lesson here that children will learn is that you should not drink and that you should not wander the street late at night. Otherwise, a demon woman will get you. What is sidestepped here is the fact that female sexuality is being demonized. In this particular narrative, the man is the victim and the woman with her sexual wiles is the aggressor. However, what is ignored is that it is the man who pursues the woman and the woman who has given him no indication that she wants to be pursued. The man sees the woman as an object that is free for the taking, so he follows her without question. What happens here is that female sexuality is portrayed as evil or dangerous while completely normalizing rape culture. Yet Haggerty and Parham have documented in Belize stories of the Shtabai that, much like the Duende, has also been a guardian of nature. So we have that duality as well, even with a traditionally evil spirit like the Shtabai. Similarly to the Shtabai, La Llorona becomes an evil spirit when she commits the gravest crime a woman can commit, killing her own children. In a machista society, being a man means being a brute, as men are with the Shtabai, and being a woman means being a mother. Therefore, infanticide is an unforgivable act. However, stories of La Llorona were birthed at a time when there was little to no understanding of the complexities and tragic consequences of postpartum depression that is only exacerbated by living in a male-dominated society. Acts driven by mental illness are demonized because we cannot fathom a mother killing her own children. This also brings to focus the treatment and marginalization of women who either cannot have children or who do not wish to have children. The myth of the Llorona focalizes that the role of the woman is to bear children and really nothing more. Chicana scholar Gloria Ansaldúa calls this the virgin-whore dichotomy, meaning that native women are either seen as hypersexual evil seductresses like the Shtabai or quaint and docile mothers. There is no in-between or gray areas. The woman must fall in line or be considered troublemakers or evil. Again, there is a deeper connection between the treatment of the colonized land and the colonized woman. Carol J. Adams observes that the connections between the oppressions of women and the rest of nature must be recognized in order to adequately understand both oppressions. In Chicana and Mexican scholarship, La Llorona is being reclaimed as a feminist icon, much like Medea, who also killed her children, is seen as a feminist icon in European retellings. We cannot be rid of the colonial influences in our folklore, as it has been so engraved there is really no telling where it ends and where it begins. However, what we can do is become aware of the lessons that are so implicit and insidious that we do not even realize that our folklore has been colonized. We must remember that colonization was land-centered, thus had to do away with native guardians, including the duende. We must reposition him as the guardian of the forest as foreign investment continues to encroach on untouched land. We must also be aware of the perceptions and understandings we have of women, femininity, and female sexuality. We must not be afraid to venture further than traditional lessons or folklore teaches us. And that is not necessarily to say that the way that our folklore exists is bad. It is important that we hold on to our folklores in order for us to pass on our cultural ideals to the future generations. However, we must also keep in mind that these retellings of these folklore characters have also been contaminated, much like everything in our society, by colonialism. And what is important is keeping that in mind and seeing in how much colonialism has really infiltrated itself even in something as commonplace as folklore. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, April.
Oh, my mic is off. I apologize.
Thank you, April.
Thank you. Technical difficulties as always. We now introduce the Cayetano sisters, Miss Kyleigh and StephAnn Cayetano. Miss Kyleigh Simone Cayetano is pursuing her BA in Entertainment and Cultural Enterprise Management at UWI-ONA. Her major piqued her interest in learning more about her heritage, and the idea of creating a podcast about Garifuna spirituality felt like the perfect project. Alongside her is Miss StephAnn Cayetano, who teaches English in Spain. Her Garifuna heritage has been her anchor while living in several countries. It is, however, challenging to learn about one's cultural traditions when living abroad, and little of this knowledge is accessible on the internet. These sisters created the podcast to gain a deeper understanding and educate their audience. Please welcome this innovative presentation by the Cayetano sisters, Podcasting as a Means of Cultural Preservation.
Mabuga, we are the Garifuna Sisters, and we will be presenting on podcasting as a means of cultural preservation. My name is Kyleigh Simone Cayetano. I'm the social media manager and a co-host for Garifuna Sisters Talk Spirituality podcast. I also am a university student attending the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, Jamaica.
Hello, my name is Ralycia Cayetano. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm currently based in Spain teaching English, and I'm also the co-host and producer of the podcast. So a podcast is an internet radio show with the added benefit that you can listen on demand. You can listen as many times as you want. You can fast forward, you can rewind. And podcasting, they've always sort of existed in the last 10 years, but they've really gotten popular in the last couple years, especially during the pandemic. And the added benefit is that people like us can create a show, we can create what we want, rather than having to go to a radio network or a TV network to ask permission to create what we want to see. What's so great about podcasting is that the resources are out there, most of them are free, and we can create what we want to see in the world, which is what we did.
I wish I had such a podcast 6 years ago.
When your journey started.
When this journey started, when I had no frame of reference, to know that I wasn't crazy and to know that the things I was experiencing, because this happens in other cultures too.
Yeah.
But specifically in Garifuna culture, like what does Garifuna cosmology have to say about ancestors and spirits and giftedness and different levels of giftedness? And
yeah,
what is a bouye? Like, what are all of these things? What does it mean?
Yeah, for the person who may not have grown up knowing, like we didn't grow up knowing. We just kind of entered this world and had to navigate, not entirely on our own, but mostly on our own because we don't live in Belize, where the resources would be, or, in any place with a large Garifuna community.
Why did I start the show? We didn't grow up in Garifuna community. We grew up my teenage years were in Jamaica. My early adult years were in Trinidad and the United States. And we always had a Garifuna household. I never questioned my Garifuna-ness. We had the music, we had the food, we had some of the language, we had the artifacts. But when it came to spirituality, that was just very, very mysterious. And I knew that it was an aspect of what we do. I knew some things like candles and setting down food and prayers. But beyond that, it was nothing. And then when I was studying abroad in Brazil, I had my experiences with spirituality, for want of a better word. And it was a tough journey. And I think part of why it was so difficult was just that I had no frame of reference. I didn't even know about ancestors and that they could, yes. So I went through my journey and I attended a women's conference with Garifuna Nation, shout out to them. And during that conference, there was a call for, what do you want to see in the Garifuna community that you could create? And then that was when I realized, well, I really still want to know more about Garifuna spirituality. What can I create? I have a phone. I have a microphone. I've got YouTube. We've got let's just, yeah. And added to that, I come from a family that knows people. And so why not use those resources, internet and knowing people and having a network to create a show. But I was super freaked out. So I turned to my sister and I was like,
My sister called me one day, very excitedly, just like, hey, I have this idea that we should start a podcast about Garifuna spirituality. And I was like, yes, of course we should, because we've always had this relationship of discussing spirituality and what we've experienced and our shared experiences and our individual experiences. And it just felt right. It felt like a natural progression of our relationship. And unintentionally in the process, we realized that we were preserving culture, because that was not our intention initially. There were guests who came to us and listeners who came to us congratulating us and thanking us for sharing this information, because we're not the only ones who've grown up outside of community or outside of the culture, outside of where our heavily populated Garifuna people are, right? So it just felt right.
And then the other thing is, we can't Google Garifuna spirituality. You can Google the music, the food, the language. People are really creating things in those more accessible parts of the culture, which is all well and good. And really, our spirituality isn't something that should be Googled, because it's very sacred, and I understand that. But as a Garifuna young person growing up in the diaspora, who has our family didn't know much when I had questions, and so they had to redirect me. And so part of starting the show was, we're not the only ones. So how can we create a platform where we can learn together about the things about spirituality that everyone should know, because it's very sacred. So there are some secrets. And I've always been very clear with our guests that we're not looking for secrets. We're looking for experiences and stories that we would tell our little sisters or our friends to help guide them, because we're all Garifuna, but the idea of Garifuna identity is evolving because we are out in the diaspora, exposed to different realities. The ones in America have to deal with being African American or being Latinx. The ones in the Caribbean, me being in Europe, it's many identities juggling.
Then the British and the French were out doing what they did, colonizing. and we fought them to protect our islands.
Naturally.
You know, the British won the war and rounded up all of us and left us on a barren island named Baliso to die.
The Garifuna arrived in Roatan, Honduras from St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 1797. 4 years after this, the records show that there were at least 150 Garifuna in Belize. Now at the time, the British were not about that life. They didn't like that. And it's said in the records, everyone is aware of the atrocities committed by these people in Grenada and St. Vincent. And there may be danger of an insurrection from these people. And so by 1811, the Garifuna people needed a permit to enter what is now present-day Belize City. There is no doubt that nowadays the Garifuna are an intricate part of Belize's cultural fabric. We're celebrated, we have our Resettlement Day. But in the beginning, we were almost immediately made separate from the rest of Belizean society, and our spirituality was demonized. This is the foundation that we're working with our podcast, because even though this initial separation was like 200 years ago, there are lasting effects. One of our guests, Garifuna drummer Joshua Arana, told us about how in his youth, while he was in high school and as a child growing up, that the music and the dance were always the popular aspects of the culture. But the spirituality...
Different guests have told us about how and why, about 70 years ago, there was a generation of Garinagu who moved away from our spirituality. This is due to the society at the time and the influence of the Catholic Church.
Ancestral worship is condemned by the church, by the Bible. And so naturally, the church does the same. But my question is, where is St. Jude? Where is St. Paul? Are they dead or they're somewhere? My ancestor, my mother, whose breast I suck, my father, who wiped away my fears, is now devil. But the saint who I don't know where he comes from, what he likes, who his parents were, I don't know at all. I am supposed to revere, honor,
Pray to
that person. I have a problem. I have a problem with that.
They were a generation of adults who had been separated for so many years because of the reality of the Garifuna at that time. If you wanted to achieve, if you wanted to succeed, you needed to distance yourself from those aspects of the culture. Of course, things have changed now, but there was a generation of Garinagu who felt that way, who had that experience. It was a choice they made because of the reality of that's what you had to do to survive. So it's not an indictment on them. It's, that behavior was necessary for the survival of our people.
Without a doubt, our music and dance aspect of our culture is definitely a part of the popular culture in Belize. But when it comes to spirituality, there are some people who are into it, or they don't want to associate at all. Some people don't want to associate out of fear and lack of understanding, and some people have simply had a negative personal experience with it, but that does not mean that that's everyone's experience by any means. Through the tailored questions which we ask each of our guests, we've tried to understand how each of them came into acknowledging and accepting their Garifuna identity, and through that, their Garifuna spirituality. This teaches us compassion, and through learning about these personal stories and experiences, we get to learn that our ancestors are also just people. We can't blame our elders for not teaching us something that they didn't know.
In each episode, we interview a featured guest, typically a leader, healer, spirituality practitioner. And we asked them questions such as what it was like growing up Garifuna. That sort of leads the conversation into, well, how is it like being introduced to spirituality, or how did you come to an understanding, acceptance? And every episode we ask our guests what advice they would give to people who are struggling or searching. And we ask them, which is our favorite question, what does it mean to them to be Garifuna? Because that is different for every single person. And I believe that it is in sharing our stories, our experiences, our struggles, that we can help each other, that we can know that we are not alone, that we're not crazy. I thought I was crazy. That we're not crazy, and that there is a level of normality to our relationship with Garifuna spirituality. Everyone's journey is unique, but it is in our uniqueness and in the specificity of our stories that we can find common ground and come to a deeper understanding of ourselves. Our aim, our goal is always for people who are 35 and younger, to be honest. People who grew up outside of Garifuna community. My aim is for the people in the diaspora who didn't grow up coming back to Belize or coming back to Guatemala and Honduras every summer. The people who don't have an auntie or uncle or their mom or dad or grandma or grandpa who can explain to them things about Garifuna spirituality. And this is for people who are at home in Belize or in community abroad, but their families or the people around them aren't into that, because that's also another thing. But what's been really surprising is that we've been touching a lot of older folk, and that's outside the scope of this presentation. But for many reasons, people across the generations in the Garifuna community have very mixed experiences with Garifuna spirituality, ranging from me not into that, me not grow up with that as one end of the spectrum, to the person that goes to Dabuyaba every summer and just goes to all of the dugu because it's fun and there's drumming and ting ting ting, and then, you know, the people that fall in between. And we also cater to that too, because even those who grew up in community, we don't all share our stories, and I really want to create a culture where we can share and learn and grow together.
We have the power to do research on our culture, have knowledgeable conversations with people who know more than we do, and share them with everyone and anyone who is willing to listen and learn along with us. Some people use YouTube, some people use Clubhouse, some people use Instagram Live or Facebook Live. We chose the platform of podcasting because it was the most accessible to us, and it's easy and free. Oh, in conclusion, listen to our podcast.
Yes, it's
shameless plug.
Yeah, it's a journey. It has been a journey. Garifuna. You have listened to Garifuna Sisters Talk Spirituality.
Thank you. I have officially found a new subscription to add to my list. Thank you, ladies. That was so insightful. Our next presentation is by Miss Ralycia Andrews. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Miss Andrews is a proud Vincentian, born and globally educated. Ralycia considers herself to be a cultural enthusiast, humanitarian, photographer, writer, and an aspiring biological and cultural anthropologist. Recently recognized for her writing work by Michigan State University's Global Youth Advancement Network, Andrews is known for her activism for the Garinagu culture, from performing in cultural plays, paying homage to the Garinagu culture, reciting poetry, and teaching basic Garifuna to children, and most recently, being a member of the Garifuna University Without Walls' Education Committee. These acts span almost 10 years of intense passion and commitment in this 21-year-old's lifetime. This global presentation brought to you by Ms. Ralycia Andrews is entitled The Garifuna University Without Walls, Cultural Sustainability, Education, and Innovation at Your Fingertips.
Hello everyone, my name is Ralycia Andrews. I'm a member of the newly established Garifuna University Without Walls Chatelier Institute of Continuing Education Committee. It is with utmost pleasure that I present to you GARIU and our quest for cultural sustainability and innovation by decolonizing education to craft courses, both online and in person, that support the longevity of the Garifuna culture. John Hawkes, a cultural analyst and one of Australia's leading commentators on cultural policy, wrote The Fourth Pillar of Sustainability, Culture's Essential Role in Public Planning. He proposed a four-pillar model where cultural, environmental, social, and economic dimensions are intrinsically bound. Dialogue regarding cultural sustainability is one of the most vital weapons to mankind. Established by the Garifuna Nation Belize, the Garifuna University Without Walls, or GARIU, is a non-governmental, non-political, non-sectarian organization that recognizes comprehensive education as an indispensable means to strategically empower individuals to effectively contribute to progressive and constructive virtue-based society building through socio-economic sustainability using the ancestral Garifuna mental model, dismantling Eurocentric teachings, and embarking on revisionist history through new, culturally structured pedagogies. GARIU's framework is engendered to UNESCO's fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with its shared blueprint for peace, prosperity, inclusivity, and the overall enrichment of the globe. Here I present to you GARIU's mission. The Garifuna University Without Walls is engaged in the defense and promotion of the mental model developed and practiced by our Garifuna ancestors. This mental model is geared towards the building of a virtue-based world in which Garinagu are provided with opportunities to maximally develop and utilize their capacities, including spiritual, social, scientific, legal, technological, and economic competencies. The Garifuna Nation intends to use these capacities in the process of participatory community building for the continuous thriving of the Garifuna people. GARIU's guiding philosophy. Here at GARIU, we pride ourselves on using these three main guiding philosophies in the teaching and presentation of our courses. Number one, the ancestral Garifuna mental model, or the AGMM. The AGMM is universal, admissible, and progressive, ensuring the survival of the Garinagu both in St. Vincent, their motherland, and in other islands where it subsequently settled. 2. Dismantling Eurocentric ideologies and pedagogies. Witnessing the impact of post-colonial trauma on the Garifuna culture, GARIU will collaborate with spiritual, socio-economic, educational, scientific, legal, and technological institutions that reflect its mission to create a symbiotic relationship from the intellectual capital of its human resources and its programs, while reaffirming the core identity of the community. Through its evolution, the goal is to create inclusive education for the people, by the people. 3. Solidifying cultural identity and ownership. As stated, dialogue regarding cultural sustainability is one of the most vital weapons to mankind. Cultural sustainability is the root of our development, for it determines the relationships we create with each other and thus the value we place on our planet's resources. GARIU intends to sow the fabric of a culturally accepting society. Here we have the 10 elements of the ancestral Garifuna mental model. Each of these 10 elements are included in our courses. The primacy of God, reverence towards the spirits of our ancestors, strategic thinking, the high value of the family, self-sufficiency, consensus-based governance, justice and unity, fearlessness, resilience, and universality. Not yet an accredited university, GARIU is already equipped with subject facilitators in Garifuna drumming, cuisine, history, medicine, technology, and the Garifuna mental model and leadership from regions within and outside of the Caribbean. In its current phase, GARIU provides education and training on the basis of continuing education through the Chatelier Institute of Continuing Education, or SISE, incorporating the ancestral Garifuna mental model in each course offered. Through its evolution, again, the goal is to create inclusive education. Here are some of the classes offered by GARIU. Garifuna mental model and leadership, Garifuna history, Garifuna language, drumming, traditional food preparation, Garifuna arts and crafts, Garifuna technology, Garifuna language using music as a vehicle, Garifuna marine biology, English as a second language for Spanish speakers, and remedial math, English, and reading. Of course, these are only some of the courses that we have planned, for we have much more in store. Growth, sustainability, and eligibility. GARIU is not yet a full-fledged university. It is in its formative stage. It already has highly qualified human resources as members of its faculty in various fields of courses it will be providing at degree levels and is in the process of seeking accreditation. The institution is fundamentally driven by the desire to contribute to the betterment of society, especially by way of facilitating the appreciation, propagation, and the defense of the ancestral Garifuna mental model. Thanks to teachers who volunteered from regions in Belize such as St. Bite, Georgetown, and Hopkins, as well as subject matter experts from the diaspora, this summer we offered the following classes: Garifuna language using music as a vehicle, Garifuna basic spoken language structure, Introduction to Garifuna leadership, Garifuna drumming, Introduction to Garifuna marine biology, English as a second language, and primary remedial math, English, and reading. The only requirement for registration to our courses is your interest and passion for culture. Here are a few highlights from our summer sessions, which ran from July 3rd to August 12th of this year. GARIU started off with a bang, which first included the advertisement of our courses through flyers and our education committee visiting certain news networks within Belize, such as the Open Your Eyes morning show. This was followed by GARIU teacher training sessions and orientation. These were hosted by members of our education committee such as Dr. Anita Barrett and Mr. James Eligio. These included teachers from the region of Belize and from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and regions within the United States. GARIU also prides itself on community involvement and a passion for inclusivity. Here in the following photo, you have a GARIU Education Committee member, Dr. Anita Barrett, and teachers of St. Bite, joined by Garifuna music artist Mr. James Ovell, who also taught summer classes, specifically Garifuna language using music as a vehicle. Following the same theme of community involvement, GARIU sought to create its own logo, seeking the public's help in the design and creation of the logo. Here is a presentation of a cash prize by a member of our education committee, Mr. Rodney Sambola on the left, to the winner of our logo contest, Mr. Nolan Groff. And as you can see above, is the specially created logo for the Garifuna University Without Walls, which has a unique blend of all our islands, including Nicaragua, Belize, the homeland St. Vincent, and a depiction of Chatelier, his wife, and certain special aspects of the Garifuna culture. The following photo depicts an introduction to Garifuna leadership class taught by a member of our education committee, Mr. James Elihu. Our students were involved and passionate about this topic, and classes were extremely interactive. Showcasing our community spirit, and again, following the theme of inclusivity, we saw it fit to show to you our members of the Garifuna University Without Walls Teaching Committee. Here we have a Georgetown principal, Mr. Desmond Ramirez, and Dr. Anita Barrett, as well as Georgetown teacher, Deslyn Zuniga. They both played integral roles in ensuring that our courses were accessible and presented to the public of Belize. Lastly, this slide shows the passion behind Gariu. We have various teachers from both the Belize region as well as the region of the United States, the passion in their faces as well as the spirit behind their words, teaching their classes. This is just a snippet of what we have to offer, and we truly plan to have your support in future endeavors. With that being said, thank you for listening. Let's keep in touch via our Facebook page at Garifuna University Without Walls at facebook.com or via our Gmail account, gariu@gmail.com. Keep updated on our fall courses and our community involvement prospects. With that, thank you once more. Hope to see you soon.
Wonderful presentation. I'm sure our audience is engaged. I can see it happening as we speak. Our final presenters for this morning's segment are Mr. Andre Habet and Miss Gabrielle Hulse. Andre Habet is a Syracuse University PhD candidate in the Cultural Composition and Rhetoric program, with a current focus on global warming rhetorics and decolonial indigenous Maya projects. He's interested in furthering his teaching experience and also to work on scholarship and film related to the aforementioned topics. Ms. Gabrielle Hulse was born in Belize City and raised in Belmopan. She received her education at Springfield College with a bachelor's degree in international relations concentrated in economic development. During her academic tenure, she was recognized as the President's Scholar of the International Studies Department and was awarded first place for her college's undergraduate research symposium. Outside her studies, Gabrielle has engaged in both governmental and political work with experiences like interning at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and assisting in the coordination of 2 political campaigns. Gabrielle is currently pursuing a world-renowned data analysis certification and is planning to take on more independent research projects. Please welcome our final presentation for this morning's session, Mr. Andre Habet and Ms. Gabrielle Hulse. If they're not so, the influence of media portrayal on Belizean identity.
It's in the city.
It's okay, I know. We'll talk about it when we get home.
Running off to Belize.
What? You went where?
Ever since Carmen Cortez of Spy Kids confessed she often ran away to Belize, my ears perked up for any mention of the country in popular media. To see our country on the silver television screen provided some sense of validation, of being seen internationally as a country with its own identity, distinct enough from our neighbors in Central America and the Caribbean. Yet, what about Belizean identity do we get from these representations? And how do these notions of Belizean culture reinforce or reject stereotypes about Belizeans?
In this video, Andre Habet and I, Gabrielle Hulse, will discuss Amazon Prime's Mad Dogs, CBS's Criminal Minds Beyond Borders, and TLC's 90 Day Fiancé, 3 US productions made in the last decade that prominently feature Belize to make the case that in the foreign imagination, Belize functions as a malleable fantasy sufficiently unknown to distort its geographies and peoples into something often unrecognizable to Belizeans watching.
Good, if he can live any way he wants to, why would he choose to live here?
Well, isn't this place supposed to be like party fucking central, girls going wild and shit?
Doubt that, we're on the mosquito coast.
It's all about the taxes.
Was here for a tax break?
The rich retirees he sold the properties to moved here for the tax breaks, and now he's staying here for the tax breaks.
These representations often point to a construction of the country that fetishizes poverty, primitive masculinity, and indigeneity. Belize exists as a space where citizens of the U.S. empire can play out fantasies and heal traumas brought on by their participation in U.S. heterosexist society. Although idyllic in some ways, largely having to do with biodiversity and exotic locales, Belize's third world inefficiencies are used in these shows to advance plotlines, confirm stereotypes, and ultimately stroke the Western ego. Our lack of resources are deliberately mentioned, often for the sole purpose of giving an opportunity for our title characters, the foreigners, to exhibit some form of material superiority.
So we don't have an embassy in San Pedro. We'll check in with the consulate and get clearance for all our weapons and vehicles.
Copy that.
In the case of Criminal Minds Beyond Borders, the entire premise of the show hinges on the absence of personnel and other resources by global majority countries.
Why is this tent in the middle of the beach? The guests are seeing this. It's causing concerns.
It's not our intention, but this is the scene of a crime.
And since San Pedro doesn't have a morgue, we're going to have to do an on-site autopsy.
Did you say autopsy?
The show repeatedly insists that U.S. intervention is called for due to this lack of material resources, and the major obstacle to action being the lack of efficient bureaucracies supposedly found in the home places of the foreign characters.
Hey, she'll be okay. Street kids here, I don't know, they manage, you know?
Yeah. Just let him scavenge. Nothing we can do.
Are you saying that there's something I personally can do?
No, I'm saying the embassy. I mean, there's an American presence in this country. Yet the kids, everywhere we go, they're begging. Some of them probably being exploited.
Belize often serves the interests and desires of expats, investors, and tourists over Belizeans. Hotels, police forces, and local businesses regularly bend to the whims of visitors, whose presence implies the circulation of foreign capital, with Belizeans frequently positioned in relief to a U.S. abundance. The street kids mentioned at the beginning of the previous clip become fodder for moral discussions about charity, while the local police force are bumbling people ill-equipped to solve crimes without the more experienced FBI team.
We ran a preliminary investigation. We spoke to witnesses at Serrano's, followed the road that they drove on, but weren't able to find them or anything criminal in nature.
So your team has concluded there was no crime committed here?
Well, there's always a possibility of a crime having taken place. But with our small police force, limited resources, we have done everything we could within our capabilities.
Will you mind if we kick the tires on this?
Of course not. Just try not to scare away too many of the tourists.
Victims in the water.
We need to drag the bay ASAP.
I'm sorry, Jack. I don't have those kind of resources.
Oh, I do, actually. I have an old military buddy open a dive shop down here. I'll give him a call.
This superiority is a trait that the characters readily recognize. There is understanding of the privilege to be an American, with a gratitude that comes from the context of being in Belize with the ability to access resources that prevent the worst-case scenarios, such as impoverishment and death.
What are they going to do for us here, right now? Send the chopper?
I don't know, the FBI then.
This is not white man's America, Lex.
In Mad Dogs, the resolution to the US characters' conflict comes not from their own actions, but from the machinations of a powerful government able to act in a foreign territory like Belize without concern for local jurisdiction.
A long legacy of victors. American exceptionalism, don't forget that. Our ancestors harnessed the power of a fucking atom and used it to bring an empire to its knees. History is on your side. You're strong, you're dominant. I look at each one of you, and I see greatness.
What is also highlighted in these representations of U.S. abundance is how often it's leveraged to take advantage of Belizeans in financial precarity. While not explicitly sex workers, Angel from Mad Dogs and Ryan from 90 Day Fiancé are framed as people whose most readily available means of securing their well-being is to exchange sex for money with tourists like Kobe and Stephanie. In these instances, the Belizeans often bear the societal shame for their participation in these transactions, despite the mutual benefits to the foreigners soliciting sex work. Presumptions of criminality abound regarding these Belizeans. For instance, Stephanie professes concern regarding Ryan stealing her mother's engagement ring despite no indication that that has had precedent in their relationship. In the case of Angel, her desire to receive compensation for the sex work she's already rendered is met with annoyance by Kobe, regardless of her efforts to directly communicate the terms of their engagement.
I skipped work today to do this.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to reschedule.
Did I reschedule when you asked me to your bedroom to make dreams come true?
No, you didn't, and it was a wonderful evening.
You brag how you make all your millions, that you can help my family with their transfer of money.
I can, and I will. I just can't do it right now.
Please don't have taken my mother's ring. Oh, God, here it is. Here's my mother's ring. He didn't take that. I don't care if he stole anything else. I'm gonna go find myself a little cabana, boy. I got tons of nice slides and slippers, and man, I got thousands of dollars of watches and tons of clothes.
Most notably in 90 Day Fiancé Stephanie, her relationship is rooted less in the individual and more in the exotified exploitation she derives pleasure from via the attention of Ryan and Harris, two men who've come to recognize her as a potential source of escape from their present socioeconomic circumstances. That's why the two Belizean men in her life are seemingly interchangeable, with little moments grief between relationships, as hinted by her Freudian slip in the next clip.
I will stick with you till you leave from here.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you, Harris. I appreciate you so much.
When not fulfilling a sex worker role, Black Belizean men are most often portrayed as stoic and ominous presences symbolic of potential dangers.
She advice, pull you down, man. Hey, we don't have any money, so why don't you just leave?
Seriously, we don't have any cash.
There you go, a present from Belize.
Even though Black Belizean men are not the sources of the majority of the violence and aggression experienced by the central characters, the camera tends to linger on them in any scene in which they appear, as if the characters, and by extension us as the audience, are expecting an outburst or unwelcome action of some kind in compliance with stereotypes of Black Caribbean men as either Mandingo-style lovers or threats to white Americans' well-being. Regardless of how little these individual encounters ultimately play out for the white Americans in terms of their safety or ability to progress in their goals, these productions repeatedly invite viewers to consider Belizean men as self-interested aggressors looking to prey on tourists.
Don't move!
You may want to thief me car.
Ronnie, give the team my coordinates. I'm gonna need Clara for this. He's speaking Creole.
Linguistically, these shows facilitate further distancing of the Belizean characters from US viewers through a representation of Belizean Creole less interested in fidelity and more interested in exoticizing the locales and people the American characters interact with in order to compensate for otherwise formulaic narratives.
Even though Belize borders with Mexico, it has much more in common with the Caribbean.
That's why they all speak Creole.
Exactly. It's a pidgin language derived mainly from English, but includes Spanish and West African languages like Bantu and Akan.
And let me guess, you speak that too.
Akan.
You okay? I am sorry. Is everyone okay?
What were you doing?
My friend distracted me.
Well, how are you gonna fix this?
It's not that bad.
Is everyone okay?
Well, you were with them?
Yeah.
Then ask your friends how they're going to pay if it is.
Though understood as both a language derived from English as well as one with its own distinct morphology, the supposed Creole speakers in these shows often either speak a caricatured version or a form of English Creole more akin to those spoken in other English Caribbean territories.
He says somebody calls him, just like the man who told him about the Jeep.
Do you know this man?
No, the man just going in the shop.
The man came into his shop, told him that he was on his way to go fishing,
Tell me he's EDG.
and saw a Jeep just off the road down in the ravine. What did he look like?
He wear some spectacles.
He wore sunglasses and a baseball hat, so he didn't get a great look at his face. And he was tan and spoke Creole, so it was definitely local. No, stretch member up, you're funny.
I know a fish. Need me? No fisherman.
I asked him if there was anything else that he saw out of the ordinary, and he said that he knows fishing, and that man was no fisherman.
In the preceding clip, the criminal Minds Beyond Borders linguist must translate the tow truck driver's Creole to make it comprehensible to the other American characters. To justify her translation work, the tow truck driver therefore delivers a form of Creole that is deliberately difficult to parse through, his final sentence tough for even Lila Vernon to understand. This underscores a fundamental issue of these portrayals. The Belizeans are not meant to be understood or really humanized beyond the needs of the plot. Nor is this more evident than in how criminal minds and mad dogs reduce indigenous people to a collection of harmful tropes and iconography.
Right, but he is not just cutting them off and out, he's actually eating them. It's an act of dominance. Eating the heart is an effort to absorb the victim's strength, while the hands and feet represent the most extreme ends of the body, thus encapsulating the whole being.
With the intention to ritualistically kill the husband.
Which is in step with the Mayan rules of engagement with other warriors.
His need to remove the hands and feet is all part of a premeditated delusion.
He's sadistic, fueled by fantasies.
And in modeling himself after a traditional Mayan warrior, the unsub is building confidence and adding credence to his fantasy.
The ease with which such stereotypical portrayals are done varies from the American men of Mad Dogs, adopting a pastiche of indigenous aesthetics when attacking a potential threat, to the Criminal Minds team characterizing pre-modern Maya as savage warriors.
The unsub is killing and consuming part of the males, but keeping the females alive, thus absorbing their strength and their property, which was a common warrior practice.
Property?
Historically, women were considered legal possessions that men could leverage for a variety of reasons.
The interchangeability is highlighted by the quickness with which one indigenous group, the Maya, is swapped out for another, Aztec, simply based on Eurocentric histories of indigenous Americans.
So what if he's taking the dead men's women as his wives?
So our unsub is not only a cannibal, but also a polygamist?
Mayans were monogamous. The only practicing polygamists in the area were Aztecs.
So his ritual is Aztec, not mine.
But Aztecs were Mexican.
Right. So we're looking for a mestizo who's good with a blade and had access to all of our victims.
Popular American media has had its role in creating images of life abroad for Belizeans, but gradually has also reflected a distorted sense of life at home. These types of shows serve as a modern digital form of imperialism, with its viewership involuntarily absorbing American ideology. As we can see from these Americentric depictions of Belizean reality, it's imperative that Belizeans do not tie our national identity to any accessory of colonialism, including the media we consume. This should also serve as a reminder of why it is important for Belizeans to create and circulate our own understandings of our culture through varied forms of media and art.
What? You know what? This is over!
Wow. What an amazing segment this morning with all of these presentations. I now call on our presenters to come on screen for our Q&A portion of this morning's presentations. I would like to welcome Mr. Gerardo Polanco, the Cayetano sisters, StephAnn and Kyleigh. Hi, Gabrielle and Andre Habet. Andre Habet and Gabrielle Hulse, and Miss Ralycia Andrews. Thank you guys so much for being here, and welcome to our Q&A for the KULCHA Symposium. We have quite an engagement happening in our comments section this morning. And I believe our first question goes to Gerardo Polanco. I will show it here on the screen. Thank you. Obaldemir Guerra says, excellent presentation. Characters and caricatures as central text on Belizean folklores conveys some of the figures you spoke about. How would you categorize its perspectives on the figures you mentioned?
Good morning, everybody, and pleasure to be with in the company of such a panel. To Mr. Guerra's question, when it comes to that book, that was essential in my research as well. That book is a compilation of folklore stories across Belize. What happened in that compilation is that they went all over the country just gathering stories. So I do not believe there is a certain focus on the perspectives from where the stories are coming from. So it is just a recording of local folklore. one thing that they noted in the beginning, as I mentioned in my presentation, was that they know that these folklore characters exist throughout ethnic groups in Belize. And I believe it would be an interesting research to see how the cross-cultural um, sharing of these same folklore characters exist. For instance, when it comes to the brujo, for instance, that exists all over the Caribbean and even here in the Afro-Caribbean communities of Belize as the Olhege. So I would want to further the research into seeing how the Afro-Caribbean spiritualities has influenced that, and how also colonialism has influenced the Afro-Caribbean spirituality in the influences of those folklore characters as well. So I do believe that Mr. Guerra is pointing to another area of the research that would be very much interesting to look into. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerardo. There's also another question here for you um, by Keyleigh. She's interested in how you see these cultural values placed on women in folklore brought into our society today.
That's an interesting question. I would not want to speak in the experience of Native or Maya Mestizo women, but I can clearly see that there is still a lot of oppression going on, especially when in terms of women across the country, not only to Maya or Mestizo women. I mean, um, every now and then on news you hear women experiencing violent ends of their lives, or experiencing some sort of abuse at the hands of some men. So it's interesting to see how vilified women can be in the society as well. And especially when it comes to these folklores, it is something that we do not really realize. As a child, it is something that I took for granted that, Dishtabay, Diorona, they're women, they're evil women. And so, again, that is another point of the presentation that should be explored further on, the connections between how these folklore characters have been colonized with Eurocentric ideals as to the treatment of modern day women in Belize and across the region as well.
Thank you. I have this question here for Miss Kyleigh and StephAnn Cayetano. Jenny Mendez, what are some tips on how you choose the individuals that are interviewed for your podcast? Do you focus more on older generations or younger or both?
Should I take this one, Kyleigh? Um, when we first started, there was a lot of concern about our guests in general, because there was a high level of concern of, were the people that we were bringing on legitimate? I don't like that word, but legitimate, because there are tricksters out there, as in any culture, So far, because we've been focusing on history and storytelling, we've had older guests on our show. But as we move forward, and especially because culture evolves and spirituality looks different for everyone, I've been very conscious of getting more young people under the age of 30, people under the age of 35. We're doing a modern day Garifuna series of where all of our guests will be under the age of 35, because we have a different experience and understanding. As for older and younger, so I would say both, but also specifically women, because when we first started, there were many men, and I love my men, I love my elder men, but very many of them raised their hands to volunteer to be a guest. And as we look for guests, it has taken more convincing to get women on the show than men, and there are perhaps many reasons for that. But I've been more focusing on getting women in general, regardless of the age, because the women are the ones that birth the culture, that transmit the culture. But I found, in my view of Garifuna-ness in Belize, that typically it's the men that speak louder and loudest, or at least perceived to be. So we've consciously tried to revert that. Kyleigh?
You said it perfectly. Yep. Yeah.
Perhaps you and Miss Andrews can have a conversation about how to get more women on your podcast with her Garifuna University without walls. This next question is also from Mr. Polanco. How much folklore is passed down through our educational institutions? Do you believe that Belizean folklore should be preserved in schools?
Yeah. Well, I don't, from my knowledge at least, from when I was in school, not very much folklore is taught in our educational institutions. I know for my part as an educator, when I teach Belizean literature and Caribbean literature, I do my best to teach folklore and how it ties into the literature of the region and the cultural identity of the region and of Belize as well. And of course, I do my best to try to teach the decolonizing of these folklore characters. But I believe that the groundwork needs to be greater than just the folklore in terms of decolonization. It is a concept that needs to be taught in school so that it can then be applicable to all aspects of our pedagogy. Not only folklore, we need to decolonize the way that we understand and view ourselves in the society. It is a pity that folklore isn't taught more in tandem with other subjects like written expression, I would say, or Spanish or something like that. But I believe that the decolonization of the pedagogy needs to come first. So thank you.
Well said, and I definitely agree with that. I have a question here for Miss Andrews by Miss Chris Andrews. How beneficial would it be for schools to teach Garifuna and encourage students to use the language as they do for Spanish and other languages?
Okay, so thank you for the question. Speaking as someone who was also a student of a similar program that came to St. Vincent, speaking the Garifuna language as well as Spanish and other languages actually provides an immersion into the culture. Because when you begin to unlock what has been lost, you begin to realize, oh, this is where I came from. Certain students in the program can pick up the language very quickly, and they suddenly start to learn songs, and they start drumming, and they start branching out, and they start getting excited about a culture that was once lost. So I would say that it is immensely beneficial for cultural preservation to cultivate interest in young people, not simply through speaking, but through music as well, which is what we have been doing with Mr. James Lavelle and Josh Aranha, because we realize that our young people today are more interested in entertainment, and that's the best way to connect with them. I answered your question.
I think we have a question here for the entire panel. I think anybody that wants to answer this question can jump in. Michael Vanegas, how can we destigmatize our cultural spirituality when we have a majorly denomination-based education system? I don't know if anybody wants to take that one on.
I will. In the context of our podcast, because many people, even those we've asked to be guests, there is a hesitation because people have been hurt, I think, by sharing their stories, their experiences. But I think I guess it starts with open-mindedness, but I think if we share our personal experiences, for example, I saw a ghost, and you know that person in their soul, they have no reason to lie. And I think if people share their stories and we come to the conversation with this posture of, let me try to understand where you're coming from. We don't have to agree, but at least let me understand. I think that is the best start, that open-mindedness. Because how you feel and how you walk through the world is certainly not how I feel and walk through the world. So how can we deny what we experience?
Anybody else wants to chime in?
I would have to agree because from what I've noticed, we as humans naturally we tend to fear what we do not understand. And because practices with religion and spirituality and history within the Garifuna community has not been shared, it tends to be a touchy subject simply because you're fearful of the unknown or because the stigma that has been associated with it through Eurocentric history. So in order to destigmatize it, we have to come to a creative way of presenting information in such a way that it wouldn't be overwhelming at first, to that point, but to slowly ease in aspects of our spirituality into not just the education system, but into the general public as well. Because if we introduce them to these children only in the education system, they're going to go home and they're going to hear something else. And then it wouldn't make sense to continue. So I actually think educating the general public also comes hand in hand with destigmatizing our culture and spirituality and religion.
Thank you.
If I can add a little to that.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, building off of what was just said also with the educating the society at large. In terms of my presentation, and I saw a friend of mine comment in the comment section about this particular thing, the nomenclature really matters when it comes to referring to folklore characters. The fact that we mentioned folklore kind of takes away from the spirituality of these entities. As he correctly said, the duende, as we refer to it in our community, is in the Kushtat. And to some people, this is not a folklore character. This is not someone that exists in the collective psyche of Belize. These are actual deities that still exist, and people still make offerings to them. As I said, whenever they're harvesting their crops and so on. So the way that we refer to these entities as folklore somehow takes away from the realness that they are for certain people in the community as well. So the way that we refer to things matters as well. Just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Polanco. We have a question here for Andre, Habet, and Gabrielle Hulse. This one comes from Kiana Chun. Do you believe that music has become one way that we have been promoted positively culture-wise? I.e. Netflix showed Outer Banks features Garifuna Collective's Waya Ways and Iderune in season 2.
That's cool. I wasn't aware of that show or its inclusion of the Garifuna Collective's music. Yeah, I agree that Belize has been promoted, I guess, positively through the inclusion of some of its music in other media. I guess for me, it's more so like, to what end is our culture being used? Who's profiting from it? You know, I'm glad that the Garifuna Collective was able to make some royalties from its inclusion from that. But it's really like, we have to think about it in terms of economics, right? It's like, to what benefit is a show set in Belize really achieving for us? Do we really want to be inviting more tourists of a particular kind to continue coming here? Because that's the effect those media representations have, is that they're an invitation to our space, but we're not really thinking of it more critically, as in, what are we inviting? What sort of activities are we inviting here? And how can we instead reframe it to think of, how can Belizeans be the beneficiary of sharing our cultural storytelling with others? And I think that's a lot of what I gained from the other presenters today, is understanding that there's a lot of narratives that are available, but then as we share them, thinking of, okay, who is materially benefiting from the sharing of this knowledge? And are those who created these cultures and who are sustaining them, are they the main beneficiaries? The inclusion of Belize in a show, whether or not at this point, doesn't matter to me if it's not paired with some form of equitable compensation for the various cultures represented. I doubt anybody who was represented in any of the shows we spoke about I don't get the sense that there was like a my consultant on board, or that there was a consultant talking about issues with Creole communities in Belize. They just made it all up. So and so as long as that continues to be okay, then we're just going to continue being in a position where our culture is going to be operationalized just to make a exotic story, and that's not interesting to me. That's not essential for me to have. At this point, I'm more interested in supporting Belizean storytellers than whether or not Belizean artists of any kind are featured in one type of media or another.
Excellent. We have one more question for Mr. Habet and Miss Hulse, and then one more question for Miss Andrews. So Marco Vasquez says, what can the Belize film industry do to portray an accurate representation of Belize? Also, is there an entity to dispel these negative representations of Belize? What can we as Belizeans do?
I just think that, I think the question is funny because it's like, I don't think we should look at these representations of Belize as negative or positive, because it's their representations. And I think to answer the first question, it's more about just telling the story, just giving us back the power to tell the story, and stop giving that power to foreign visitors or foreign people or foreign film industries that try to take that away in a sense and try to give their own representations. So I would say to stop looking at foreign media as representations, if even representations at all, because it's distorted in their way, and it's distorted in the sense that they are telling what they believe our country is or what it represents, and they're also telling a story that represents what they want it to represent, what they want our country to represent. And so I think it's about taking away that power and stop looking at these representations as true representations, therefore not even, you can't really apply the terms positive or negative because they're not true, and they're not true to what Belize is. And so I think for just any film industry or any person or any creative or any person creating art forms in Belize, it's just about being able to take back that power, tell your stories. And I think any part of that would be an accurate representation, but also be aware to not to fall victim to the foreign representations in your own storytelling. Just to be critical about it, and just be critical in the sense that you are Belizean and the stories that you want to tell as a Belizean, not really what you think other people are going to enjoy or what you think other people are going to consume. I think it's just important to think critically about it, and to not fall victim to the different stereotypes that we have been told are true to us. I think it's important to just, tell your story, but tell it in the way that you know it exists, not in the way it exists on the outside world.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer, Ms. Hulse. And our last question is for Ms. Andrews. Ms. Kiana Chun, as a history student finishing up her bachelor's degree in history and a minor in education, how would I be able to join the education arena of Garifuna?
Okay, so you can reach out to us via our Facebook page. We're very active there. And we're actually looking for members of classes. So we're very open to involving members of the community, members of the Vincentian community, Garifuna members within there and the United States. So you can send us a quick message at gary@facebook.com, or you can send us an email at garyu@gmail.com, and we'll respond to you as quickly.
I think we lost the connection there a little bit at the end, Ms. Andrews, but please also remember that these presentations are going to be featured on our Facebook and our YouTube page. Thank you all so much for being a part of our morning's session. And with that, I will close for lunch, and join us this afternoon at 12:30, guys, for our final two sessions for day 2, Thank you all. This was a lovely panel. This was an engaging conversation, and we'll see you guys this afternoon. Make sure you're there.